You arrogant piece of trash. The red wine cascaded down Rick Castellano's $15,000 Armani suit like blood from a fresh wound. The crystal glass shattered against the marble floor of the Bellagio's private dining room, its fragments catching the chandelier light like diamonds. Rick's jaw clenched, his steel-grey eyes turning deadly cold. The woman, Mrs. Patricia Hoffman, stood defiantly before him, her manicured hands trembling with rage. "How dare you speak to my husband like that? We built our empire without criminals like you." Behind Patricia, her husband David shifted nervously, knowing exactly who Rick was. The $900 million merger deal they'd been discussing for months hung in the balance, but Patricia had just signed their death warrant. Rick's tattooed hand slowly reached for his phone. One call. That's all it would take. Marcus would handle it quietly, efficiently. No one disrespected Rick Castellano and lived to— "Sir, please." A soft voice interrupted his murderous thoughts. A young redhead in a server's uniform stepped between them, her green eyes meeting his with unexpected courage. "Let me get you cleaned up. There's been enough drama for one evening. Hey, everyone. If you're enjoying this intense story, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything, and trust me, this is just the beginning of an incredible journey. Hit that like button if you want to see how this dangerous romance unfolds. Maria Santos had been serving tables at the Bellagio for 3 years, but she'd never seen anything like this. The man before her radiated power and danger in equal measure. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his olive skin marked with intricate tattoos that disappeared beneath his expensive suit. Everything about him screamed money and menace, but something else caught her attention, the flicker of surprise in his eyes when she stepped forward. Like no one had ever shown him kindness in a moment of humiliation. "Ma'am, perhaps you and your husband should leave," Maria said gently to Patricia, never breaking eye contact with Rick. "The evening's been stressful for everyone." Patricia huffed indignantly, but grabbed David's arm. "Come on, David, we don't need to associate with criminals." She shot one final glare at Rick before storming out, her heels clicking angrily against the marble. The silence that followed was deafening. Rick stood motionless, wine still dripping from his hair, his dangerous gaze now fixed entirely on Maria. She could feel the weight of his stare, the electricity crackling between them. "You have no idea who I am, do you?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly, with just a hint of an accent that spoke of Brooklyn streets and old-world traditions. Maria grabbed a clean napkin from a nearby table, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I know you're someone who deserves basic respect, regardless of what that woman thinks." Rick's expression softened almost imperceptibly. In 38 years of life, 20 of them spent climbing the ranks of organized crime. No one had ever defended him without expecting something in return. "What's your name?" he asked as she gently dabbed at the wine on his forehead. "Maria Santos," she replied, her fingers steady despite her nervousness. "And you?" "Rick," he said simply, though the name carried weight in certain circles from Vegas to New York. "Thank you, Maria Santos. You may have just saved more lives than you realize." As Maria continued cleaning the wine from his dark hair, Rick felt something shift inside him, a crack in the armor he'd built around his heart. This red-headed angel had no idea she'd just changed both their destinies forever. Maria led Rick to the private bathroom adjacent to the dining room, her heart still racing from the confrontation. She'd acted on pure instinct, seeing the murderous look in his eyes and knowing someone was about to get hurt. "Sit," she instructed, gesturing to the marble vanity chair. Rick, this mysterious, dangerous man, actually obeyed, which surprised them both. She wetted a towel with warm water, her movements careful and gentle. "You realize what you just did?" Rick's voice was quiet, almost reflective. "That woman. People have died for less disrespect." Maria's hand paused for just a moment. "And would that have made anything better?" Rick studied her reflection in the mirror. "It would have sent a message." "What kind of message?" Maria continued cleaning the wine from his hair, her touch surprisingly intimate for strangers. "That you're someone to be feared. People already know that. I can see it in how the staff here looks at you." She was right. Every waiter, every manager had given Rick a wide berth tonight, their eyes filled with recognition and terror. But not Maria. Never Maria. "So what's your story, Maria Santos?" Rick asked, genuinely curious. "What makes a waitress brave enough to stop a man like me from doing what I do best?" Maria met his eyes in the mirror. "Maybe I see something in you that you don't see in yourself. And what's that? Someone who's tired of being who everyone expects him to be. The words hit Rick like a physical blow. How could this woman, this stranger, see through decades of carefully constructed reputation in a single moment? You're not wrong, he admitted, the confession surprising him. But some things can't be undone, Maria. Some paths don't have exits. Maria finished cleaning the wine and stepped back, but didn't leave. Every path has exits. Sometimes you just need someone to show you where they are. Rick stood slowly, adjusting his ruined jacket. Even wine-stained, he looked powerful, magnetic. What if I told you that the business meeting you just interrupted was worth $900 million? I'd say money doesn't justify murder. And what if I told you that those people aren't who they claim to be? Maria's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Rick's phone buzzed. A text from his lieutenant, Marcus. Boss, something's wrong with the Hoffman deal. My contacts say David Hoffman died 3 years ago in a car accident. Rick's blood ran cold. He showed Maria the message. It means we're both in more danger than you know. Maria read the text twice, her face paling. If David Hoffman died 3 years ago, then who? Federal agents, Rick said grimly. And if they're here for me, anyone associated with me becomes a target. He grabbed her arm gently but firmly. Maria, you need to disappear. Tonight. But Maria stepped closer instead of backing away. And leave you to face this alone? I'm used to alone. Well, maybe it's time you learn to trust someone. Maria's green eyes blazed with determination. Besides, if they're federal agents, and I'm the witness who saw their blown cover, I'm already involved whether we like it or not. Rick stared at her, this red-headed angel who'd walked into his life like a guardian sent from heaven. Every instinct told him to run, to get as far from her as possible before his world destroyed her innocence. But something stronger than instinct was taking root in his chest, something that felt suspiciously like hope. Maria, he said softly, you have no idea what you're getting yourself into. She smiled, and it was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. Then I guess you'd better start explaining. Outside the bathroom, neither of them noticed the small surveillance device hidden in the flower arrangement, broadcasting every word to a black SUV parked across the street. Rick's penthouse office overlooked the glittering Vegas Strip, but tonight the view felt more like a prison. Maria sat across from his mahogany desk, still wearing her server's uniform, looking completely out of place in his world of leather and steel. Let me get this straight, Maria said, absently playing with her red hair. You're telling me you run... What exactly? Import-export, Rick replied carefully. High-end goods, exclusive clientele. Maria raised an eyebrow. Import-export doesn't usually require armed bodyguards or make people look at you like you're the Grim Reaper. Rick couldn't help but smile. Observant. Answer the question, Rick. The way she said his name, without fear, without reverence, just simple human connection, made something in his chest tighten. I run the Western Territory for a very old family business. We handle problems that law enforcement can't or won't touch. The Mafia, Maria said simply. That's a Hollywood term? But accurate? Rick leaned back in his chair, studying her face for signs of terror or judgment. He found neither. Why aren't you running, Maria? Because, she said, standing up and walking to his floor-to-ceiling windows, everyone deserves a chance to be seen for who they really are, not just what they do. Below them, tourists and locals moved like colorful ants along the strip, each carrying their own secrets and stories. Rick joined her at the window, close enough to catch the faint scent of her perfume. What I really am, Rick said quietly, is a man who's killed 17 people. A man who owns half the politicians in this state. A man who could have you disappeared with a single phone call. Maria turned to face him, unflinching. And what I really am is a woman who grew up in foster care, who worked 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school, and who sees that underneath all that power and violence, you're just a man who's scared of letting people see his heart. The truth of her words hung between them, like electricity before a storm. Rick had built his entire identity around being untouchable, unreachable, unknowable, but this red-headed waitress was dismantling his defenses with nothing more than honesty and courage. The nursing school, Rick said. Is that why you stepped in tonight, your training? Maria smiled softly. Partly, but mostly because I know what it's like to be alone in the world, and no one, not even a powerful man like you, should have to face betrayal alone. Rick's phone rang, breaking the intimate moment. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. Boss, we've got problems. The Hoffmans checked into the Four Seasons under fake passports, military-grade surveillance equipment. This is a federal operation. How close are they? Rick asked, his entire demeanor shifting into survival mode. Close enough to have eyes on your building. Rick ended the call and turned to Maria. We need to leave now. Where are we going? Somewhere safe while I figure out how to keep you alive. Maria grabbed his arm. Rick, wait. What if they're not just after you? What if this is bigger than just one bust? Rick paused. What do you mean? Think about it, a $900 million deal. That's not small time. What if they're trying to bring down your entire organization? The realization hit Rick like a sledgehammer. The merger wasn't just about him. It was about connecting his operation to the East Coast families. If the feds had infiltrated at this level, they're not just hunting me, Rick said grimly. They're trying to bring down everyone I work with. Then running won't solve anything. No, Rick agreed, his mind already working through possibilities. But it'll buy us time to figure out who we can trust. As they prepared to leave, Rick caught Maria's reflection in the dark window. She looked determined, brave, beautiful, and completely unprepared for the war they were about to fight. But as he watched her square her shoulders and meet his eyes in the glass, Rick realized something that both terrified and thrilled him. Maria Santos wasn't just changing his life, she was changing him. Gausup, the safe house, was a modest ranch home in Henderson, 20 miles from the Strip's neon chaos. Rick had purchased it years ago under a shell company, one of dozens of properties scattered across the Southwest for exactly this kind of emergency. Maria explored the sparsely furnished space while Rick made encrypted calls to his network. The house felt temporary, sterile, like a hotel room waiting for its first guests. How many safe houses do you have? Maria asked, settling onto the leather couch beside him. Enough, Rick replied, ending another call. Marcus is running background checks on everyone connected to the Hoffman operation. So far, we've identified at least 6 federal agents embedded in various businesses across the city. 6? Maria's voice rose with concern. This is massive. It gets worse. Rick's expression was grim. The real David and Patricia Hoffman were murdered 3 years ago in what looked like a car accident. Someone's been planning this operation for a very long time. Maria absorbed this information, her nursing background helping her stay calm under pressure. Who benefits from taking down your organization? Competing families, federal prosecutors looking for career-making cases, politicians who need to look tough on organized crime? Rick trailed off, then looked at Maria sharply. Or someone inside my organization who wants to take over. The possibility hung between them like a loaded gun. Rick had survived 20 years in organized crime by trusting no one completely, but even he had people he considered loyal. Who has access to your meeting schedules? Maria asked. My inner circle. 5 men who've been with me for years. Rick's voice became dangerous. If one of them sold me out, we need proof before you do anything irreversible. Rick stared at her. We? Maria met his gaze steadily. I'm involved now, whether either of us likes it. Those agents saw me help you. My fingerprints are on that wine glass. My face is on every security camera in that dining room. If they can't get to you, I'm their consolation prize. The truth of her words made Rick's chest tighten with a protective rage he'd never felt before. In his world, collateral damage was expected, acceptable. But the thought of Maria being hurt because of him made something primitive and violent stir in his soul. I won't let anything happen to you, Rick said, the promise carrying weight that went far beyond professional obligation. I know, Maria replied simply, as if trusting a Mafia boss with her life was the most natural thing in the world. Rick's phone buzzed with a secure message from Marcus. Found something. Patricia Hoffman's credit cards were used at a tactical supply store. They're planning something big. We need to move, Rick said, standing abruptly. They're not just watching anymore, they're preparing to act. Where can we go that they won't find us? Rick was quiet for a moment, weighing options that all carried deadly risks. There's one place. But Maria, if we go there, you'll see things that can never be unseen. You'll be part of my world in ways that can never be undone. Maria stood and faced him, her green eyes clear and determined. Rick, I made my choice the moment I stepped between you and your anger. Everything after that is just details. Rick felt something shift inside him, a wall crumbling, a defense finally failing after decades of careful construction. This woman, this beautiful, brave, impossible woman, was choosing him over safety, over normalcy, over every rational instinct that should be screaming at her to run. There's something else, Rick said quietly. Something I haven't told you. What? The reason this operation is so elaborate, so expensive. Rick's voice became grave. They're not just trying to arrest me, Maria. They're trying to start a war between the families, and if they succeed, hundreds of innocent people will die in the crossfire. Maria stepped closer, her hand finding his. Then we stopped them. Rick looked down at their joined hands, her small soft fingers intertwined with his scarred, dangerous ones, and realized that somewhere between the wine stain and this moment, he'd fallen in love with Maria Santos, and that terrified him more than any federal investigation ever could. The warehouse sat in the industrial district like a sleeping giant, its corrugated metal walls hiding Rick's most sensitive operations. As they drove through the security gates, Maria saw armed men positioned strategically around the perimeter, not thugs, but professional soldiers in expensive suits. "This is your real headquarters," Maria observed. "One of them." Rick parked near the main entrance. "Maria, once we go inside, there's no pretending anymore. You'll see exactly who I am and what I'm capable of. Are you trying to scare me away? I'm trying to give you one last chance to choose a normal life." Maria turned to face him fully. "Rick, I've never had a normal life. Foster care taught me that survival means adapting to whatever situation you're in. And right now, my situation is being hunted by federal agents alongside a man I'm falling in love with." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross so soon. Rick's breath caught, his carefully controlled emotions suddenly chaotic. "Maria, don't tell me it's complicated or dangerous or impossible. I know all of that." Her voice was soft but firm. "Just tell me if you feel it too." Rick cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "I've felt it since the moment you stepped between me and my demons. But loving me means accepting that I might not survive this. Then we'd better make sure you do." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative like two people discovering fire for the first time. Then urgency took over, the desperation of two souls finding each other in the darkness, the passion of knowing that tomorrow was far from guaranteed. When they broke apart, Rick's forehead rested against hers. "Come on, let me show you my world." Inside the warehouse, Maria was surprised by the sophisticated operation she found. Computer stations monitored shipping routes, financial markets, and communication networks. Men in suits moved with purpose and precision, speaking in code and dealing with problems she could only guess at. Mr. Castellano, a tall man with graying temples, approached them. "Marcus Romano, my lieutenant," Rick explained to Maria. "Status report." "The feds moved up their timeline," Marcus said grimly. "Our sources say they're planning coordinated raids across 6 cities tomorrow night. Vegas, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Denver, Kansas City, and Miami. Simultaneous operations," Rick mused. "They want to cripple the entire Western network at once." "There's more. We identified the lead agent, Director Sarah Chen, FBI Organized Crime Task Force. She has a personal vendetta against you, boss. Her brother was killed in the Torino family war 5 years ago." Maria watched Rick's face grow deadly serious. "The Torino war was self-defense. They came after us first. Chen doesn't see it that way. This isn't just law enforcement, boss. This is revenge." Rick absorbed this information while Maria tried to understand the implications. A federal agent with a personal grudge explained the elaborate setup, the months of planning, the willingness to murder innocent people to create false identities. "Show me everything we have on Chen's operation," Rick ordered. As Marcus led them to a secure conference room, Maria felt the weight of the world she was entering. Maps covered the walls, showing territories, shipping routes, and what she realized were the locations of other criminal organizations. Red pins marked federal investigations, blue pins showed allied operations, black pins. "What do the black pins represent?" she asked. Rick and Marcus exchanged glances. "Competition that's been eliminated," Rick said quietly. Maria nodded, processing this. "How many people work for you?" "Directly? About 200. Indirectly, legitimate businesses, contractors, people who depend on our operations, probably 15,000. 15,000 families," Maria said. "That's right. And if Chen succeeds in sparking a war between the organizations, most of those people will either be arrested, killed, or lose their livelihoods." Maria understood now why Rick carried himself with such gravity. He wasn't just a criminal, he was responsible for an entire community of people who lived in the shadows of legitimate society. "Rick," she said, "what if we could stop this without violence?" Both men looked at her like she'd suggested they fly to the moon. "What do you mean?" Rick asked. "You said Director Chen wants revenge for her brother's death. What if we could prove that the Torino War wasn't your fault? What if we could give her the real truth?" Marcus snorted. 5 years later, the evidence is long gone. But Rick was staring at Maria with growing amazement. "Unless it's not," he said slowly. "Marcus, do we still have the Torino surveillance files?" Marcus's eyes widened. "The warehouse in Phoenix. But boss, if those files still exist, they could prove that the Torinos were working with federal agents when they attacked us," Rick finished. "Chen's brother died because his own agency hung him out to dry." Maria smiled. "Sometimes the best way to win a war is to show your enemy who the real enemy is." Rick kissed her again, harder this time, filled with admiration and hope. "You brilliant, beautiful woman. You might have just saved all our lives." The flight to Phoenix took 90 minutes in Rick's private jet, but it felt like an eternity. Maria sat beside him in the leather cabin, watching the desert landscape pass below, while he made call after encrypted call, arranging for security teams to retrieve files that might not even exist anymore. "Tell me about the Torino War," Maria said during a quiet moment. Rick's jaw tightened. "The Torinos ran the Southwest before I moved into Vegas. Old-school family, very traditional. They didn't like a young guy from Brooklyn setting up operations in what they considered their territory. So they attacked you? They tried to have me killed, yes, but the hit felt wrong from the beginning, too sloppy, too public. The Torinos were usually more subtle." Rick stared out the window. 3 of my men died that night, including a kid named Tony, who was barely 22. "And Chen's brother?" "Agent Michael Chen was working undercover with the Torinos. When the shooting started, he was caught in the crossfire. I never knew he was federal until years later." Maria absorbed this. "But if you have surveillance footage proving the Torinos initiated contact with federal agents, it would mean Director Chen has spent 5 years hunting the wrong man." Rick's expression was grim. "It would also mean her own agency sacrificed her brother to maintain their cover." The plane began its descent into Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, where 3 black SUVs waited on the private tarmac. Marcus had arrived an hour earlier with a full security team, but Rick was still tense. "The warehouse is in an industrial area near South Mountain," Rick explained as they transferred to the lead SUV. "We used it primarily for automotive imports, legitimate business that provided cover for other activities." "Used it?" "It's been shuttered for 3 years. If the files still exist, they'll be in a hidden vault beneath the main floor." The warehouse looked abandoned from the outside, its windows dark and parking lot cracked with desert heat. But Marcus's team had already cleared the perimeter and disabled the security systems. Motion sensors were still active, Marcus reported as they entered through a side door. "Someone's been maintaining minimal power to the facility." Inside, dust motes danced in the beams from their flashlights. The main floor was empty except for some abandoned machinery, but Rick led them to a freight elevator hidden behind a false wall. "The vault is climate-controlled," Rick explained as they descended. "If the files survived, they'll be in perfect condition." The basement revealed a sophisticated archive, filing cabinets, computer servers, and wall-mounted screens that flickered to life as they entered. Maria felt like she was in a spy movie, watching Rick input access codes to systems that should have been disconnected years ago. "Motion-activated backup power," Rick explained, noting her amazement. Marcus checked the surveillance files from September 15th through October 3rd, 2020. While Marcus worked at a computer terminal, Rick showed Maria the scope of information they'd collected over the years: shipping manifests, financial records, communication intercepts, and thousands of hours of surveillance footage. "You documented everything," Maria observed. "In our business, information is the difference between life and death. You never know when you'll need to prove someone else started a war." "Boss!" Marcus called out excitedly. "I found it. September 28, 2020. Torino family meeting with federal contact." The footage was crystal clear. Vincent Torino, the family patriarch, sitting across from a man in a cheap suit who was definitely not part of organized crime. Their conversation was being recorded from multiple angles. "Can you enhance the audio?" Rick asked. Marcus adjusted some settings and suddenly voices filled the room. "Guarantee protection if you eliminate Castellano's operation. My people are willing to look the other way during the transition period. And afterward? Afterward, you have a free hand in Nevada and Arizona. Just keep the violence minimal and the profits flowing to our offshore accounts." Maria gasped. That's federal agent corruption at the highest level. Keep playing, Rick ordered grimly. There is one complication, Vincent Torino's voice continued. We have an undercover federal agent embedded with us. Agent Michael Chen, what happens to him? Acceptable losses, the federal contact replied coldly. Agent Chen's cover will be blown during the operation. Make sure he doesn't survive to testify about what he's seen. The room fell silent. Rick's hands were clenched into fists, his face a mask of controlled rage. Maria felt sick to her stomach. Director Chen's brother wasn't just caught in crossfire, she whispered. He was deliberately sacrificed by his own people, and I've been blamed for it ever since, Rick said quietly. Marcus, copy everything. Every file, every recording, every piece of evidence we have about federal corruption in the Torino operation. Boss, if we release this, we'll be declaring war on the FBI, Rick finished. But if we don't, Director Chen's vendetta will destroy thousands of innocent lives. Maria grabbed Rick's arm. There's another option. Both men looked at her. We give the evidence to Director Chen directly. Show her the truth about her brother's death. Let her decide whether revenge against you is more important than justice for the people who actually killed him. Rick stared at Maria as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. You want me to walk up to a federal director who's been hunting me for 5 years and hand her evidence that could destroy her own agency? I want you to trust that a sister's love for her brother is stronger than years of misdirected anger. Marcus shook his head. Boss, it's suicide. The moment we make contact, she'll have us all arrested. But Rick was studying Maria's face, seeing something in her eyes that made him question everything he thought he knew about loyalty, trust, and the possibility of redemption. Maria, he said quietly, you're asking me to bet everything. My life, your life, the lives of everyone who depends on me, on the chance that a federal agent will choose truth over career. Yes, Maria said simply, because that's what love does. It takes impossible risks for the right reasons. Rick kissed her then, soft and desperate, knowing that he was about to either save thousands of lives or destroy them all. But as he looked into Maria's green eyes, he realized that some leaps of faith were worth taking. Marcus, he said, never breaking eye contact with Maria, set up a meeting with Director Chen. Tell her we have information about her brother's death. Boss! Do it, Rick ordered, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd just chosen love over survival. And pray that Maria's right about human nature. Dun Sisu, Director Sarah Chen agreed to meet at Neutral Ground, a 24-hour diner in downtown Phoenix, far from any federal facilities. She came alone, as requested, but Rick knew snipers were positioned on nearby rooftops, and surveillance teams were monitoring every entrance. This is either very brave or very stupid, Marcus muttered as they parked across the street. Rick studied the modest diner through binoculars. Probably both. He handed Maria a small encrypted device. If this goes wrong, press the red button. It'll signal Marcus to get you out of here. I'm not leaving you. Maria, we discussed this. We're in this together, remember? Rick loved her courage, even as it terrified him. Stay close to me. Don't trust anyone except Marcus. And if shooting starts, get behind cover and stay down. They entered the diner as a unit. Rick in the lead, Maria beside him, Marcus covering their six. Director Chen sat in a corner booth, her dark hair pulled back severely, her expression unreadable. She was smaller than Rick had expected, but her eyes held the hardness of someone who'd seen too much death. Mr. Castellano, she said as they approached, I admit, this wasn't how I planned to finally meet you. Director Chen. Rick slid into the booth across from her. Maria beside him. Thank you for coming. I came because you claim to have information about my brother's death. If this is some kind of game, it's not. Rick placed a tablet on the table between them. What I'm about to show you will destroy everything you think you know about that night. Chen's composure cracked slightly. Michael died because of your war with the Torinos, because you couldn't resolve your territorial disputes without violence. Your brother died because his own agency sold him out, Maria said quietly. Chen's eyes snapped to Maria. And you are? Someone who believes that truth matters more than vengeance. Rick activated the tablet, showing Chen the surveillance footage from the warehouse. Her face went pale as she watched Vincent Torino discussing her brother's fate with a federal contact. This is impossible, she whispered. The man your brother was meeting with, Rick said, was Assistant Director Frank Morrison, your former supervisor. The same man who recommended you for your current position. Chen stared at the screen in horror. Frank Morrison has been my mentor for 15 years. He's also been running protection rackets for organized crime families across the Southwest, Rick continued relentlessly. Your brother discovered the corruption and was going to expose it. So Morrison arranged for the Torinos to eliminate both of us. Michael as a witness, me as a scapegoat. The waitress approached their table, but Marcus waved her away with a look that could have melted steel. The diner suddenly felt very quiet, very dangerous. Why show me this? Chen asked, her voice barely controlled. Because tomorrow night, you're planning coordinated raids across 6 cities that will start a war, Rick replied. Innocent people will die. Legitimate business people, families who depend on our organizations for their livelihoods, law enforcement officers who don't know they're walking into a trap. My operations are clean. Morrison is feeding information to rival crime families, Rick interrupted. He's positioned to benefit from the chaos that follows your raids. The man who killed your brother is using you to finish the job. Chen looked at the evidence on the tablet, then at Rick, then at Maria. You're asking me to believe that my entire career has been built on a lie. I'm asking you to consider that possibility, Rick said gently. Your brother was a good man, Director. He died trying to expose corruption, not because of gang violence. Even if this is true, Chen said slowly, you're still a criminal. Your organization still causes harm. Maria leaned forward. Then arrest him legally. Build a legitimate case based on real crimes, not fabricated evidence. Don't let Morrison use you to cover up his own corruption. Chen studied Maria's face. Why do you care? You're clearly not part of this world. Because I love him, Maria said simply. And because love means wanting justice, not just revenge. The honesty of her statement hung between them like a challenge. Chen looked at Rick with new eyes, seeing not just a target, but a man who'd inspired loyalty and love in someone like Maria. If I stop the raids, Chen said carefully, what happens to Morrison? We have enough evidence to put him away for life, Rick replied. But it has to come from you. Internal affairs won't investigate unless the complaint comes from someone with your credibility. And what about you? Rick was quiet for a long moment. I've done things that deserve punishment, but not for your brother's death. If you want to pursue legitimate charges against my organization, do it through proper channels, with real evidence. Chen stared at the tablet screen, watching her brother's death warrant being signed by the man she'd trusted for 15 years. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. Michael used to say that justice and vengeance were 2 different things, she whispered. He said vengeance was easy, but justice required courage. Your brother was right, Maria said softly. Chen closed the tablet and stood up. I need to make some phone calls. Mr. Castellano, you have 24 hours before I expect a full accounting of every criminal activity your organization has engaged in over the past 5 years. Understood? Chen paused at their table. And Mr. Castellano? If you hurt her, she nodded toward Maria, I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your very short life. As Chen left the diner, Rick felt something he hadn't experienced in years, hope that his past might not define his future. Do you think she'll really stop the raids? Maria asked. Rick watched Chen's car disappear into Phoenix traffic. She's a federal director who just learned her mentor murdered her brother. If she's half the woman her brother was, Morrison is about to have a very bad day. Marcus approached their booth. Boss, we should move. This place will be crawling with feds in 30 minutes. As they headed for the exit, Maria grabbed Rick's hand. Whatever happens next, I'm proud of you for choosing truth over violence. Rick squeezed her fingers, knowing that the hardest part was still ahead. Chen might stop the raids, but Morrison wouldn't go down without a fight, and in Rick's world, cornered enemies were the most dangerous kind. Thelastu, the safe house in Sedona, was carved into red rock cliffs, accessible only by a narrow mountain road that Rick's security team could monitor from miles away. As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of fire, Rick and Maria finally had time to process what had happened in Phoenix. Do you really think Chen believed us? Maria asked, standing on the terrace overlooking the valley below. Rick joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She's a smart woman, and she loved her brother. She'll investigate. And Morrison? Morrison is about to discover that 15 years of corruption leaves a very long paper trail. Rick's voice was grim. Chen will find evidence we never even knew existed. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the desert darkness. For the first time in days, they felt safe, hidden, protected by distance and geography from the war raging in the world below. Rick, Maria said softly, what happens to us when this is over? It was the question he'd been avoiding, the reality that had haunted him since the moment she'd stepped into his life. I don't know, he admitted. My world doesn't exactly have room for normal relationships. Good thing I'm not normal. Rick turned her to face him, studying her beautiful face in the moonlight. Maria, you're a nurse. You save lives, you help people heal, you make the world better. I'm a man who chose truth over revenge when it mattered most. A man who protects thousands of people who have nowhere else to turn. A man who's capable of love, even when love makes him vulnerable. You see me differently than I see myself. That's what love is. Seeing someone's potential instead of just their past. Rick cupped her face in his hands. I've never had anyone believe in me the way you do. Then it's time you started believing in yourself. Their kiss was different this time. Not desperate or urgent, but deep and sure, like two people who'd found home in each other's arms. Rick led her inside to the bedroom, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the star-filled desert sky. Are you sure? He asked, his voice husky with desire and restraint. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Making love with Maria was a revelation, tender and passionate, vulnerable and strong, like discovering a part of himself he'd never known existed. Afterward, she lay against his chest, her red hair spread across his shoulder like silk. Tell me about your tattoos, she said, tracing the intricate designs that covered his arms and chest. Each one tells a story, Rick replied, his voice drowsy with contentment. This one, he indicated a compass rose on his left shoulder, was for my first job. I was 19, scared, trying to prove myself to men who'd known my father. Your father was in this business too. Antonio Castellano. He ran the Brooklyn docks until a rival family had him killed when I was 17. Rick's voice hardened. I spent the next 20 years making sure that family regretted touching him. Maria's finger traced another tattoo, a phoenix rising from flames. And this one? That's for Vegas. When I came west to start fresh, to build something better than the blood feuds and ancient grudges that destroyed my father. Did you? Build something better? Rick considered the question. I thought I had, but meeting you made me realize the difference between building an empire and building a life. Maria lifted her head to look at him. What's the difference? Empires are about power and control. Lives are about love and connection. Rick smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You taught me that. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking the intimate moment. Rick considered ignoring it, but the encrypted tone indicated urgent business. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. Boss, turn on the news, Channel 7. Rick activated the bedroom's wall-mounted television, finding a breaking news report from Phoenix. A serious-faced reporter stood outside FBI headquarters. Stunning development in what sources are calling the biggest corruption scandal in Bureau history. Assistant Director Frank Morrison was arrested tonight on charges including conspiracy, murder, and racketeering. According to sources close to the investigation, Morrison is accused of accepting bribes from organized crime figures and orchestrating the death of undercover agent Michael Chen in 2020. Maria sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. She did it, Chen actually did it. The reporter continued. In a related development, Director Sarah Chen has announced the suspension of Operation Desert Storm, a coordinated series of raids that were scheduled for tomorrow night. Bureau spokesmen say the operation was compromised by Morrison's alleged corruption and is being completely restructured. Rick felt a weight he'd carried for years finally lift from his shoulders. It's over, he said quietly. The raids are cancelled, Morrison is in custody, and Chen knows the truth about her brother. What about your organization? Chen will still come after us, but legally now. Clean investigations, proper warrants, real evidence, the way it should be. Maria curled up against him again. So what do we do now? Rick was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what had just changed. For the first time in 20 years, he wasn't running from anything or planning the next battle. He was just a man in love with a woman who'd saved his life in every way that mattered. Now, he said, kissing the top of her head, we figure out how to build that life we talked about. Outside their window, the Arizona desert stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars, vast and beautiful, and full of possibilities neither of them had dared to imagine. Shakton. The emergency meeting was called for dawn at Rick's Las Vegas headquarters. Maria insisted on coming despite Rick's concerns about her safety. Morrison's arrest had created a power vacuum, and ambitious criminals on both sides of the law were moving to fill it. "Boss," Marcus reported as they gathered in the secure conference room, "we've got problems. Morrison's people are burning evidence and eliminating witnesses. 3 of our contacts in Los Angeles have gone silent." "Rival families?" Rick asked. "The Torinos are making moves in Arizona. They think Morrison's arrest gives them an opening to reclaim territory." Marcus pulled up a map on the wall screen. "Chicago is pressuring our Denver operations, and someone leaked the location of our Miami warehouse. Federal agents raided it this morning." Maria studied the map, understanding for the first time the scope of Rick's responsibilities. How many people are in immediate danger? Dozens directly, hundreds if this escalates into open warfare. Rick's expression was grim. Morrison may be in custody, but his network is still active. They know that if Chen builds legitimate cases against the families, everyone goes down. "So they're trying to start the war Morrison wanted," Maria concluded. "Exactly. They figure chaos is better than organized prosecution." Rick's phone rang, Director Chen's direct line. "Mr. Castellano, we have a situation. Morrison's people have kidnapped Federal Judge Patricia Valdez. She's the one who would have presided over any cases we built against your organization." Rick put the call on speaker. "Where?" "Unknown. But they left a message. If we don't drop all charges against Morrison and reinstate Operation Desert Storm, Judge Valdez dies in 24 hours. Maria felt her blood run cold. "They're forcing you to choose between stopping corruption and saving an innocent woman's life." "It's worse than that," Chen continued. "Judge Valdez is also Michael's former girlfriend. They stayed close friends after their breakup. This is personal." Rick absorbed this information. "Director, what do you need from us? Morrison's network operates in your world, not mine. You have contacts, resources, and information that federal law enforcement doesn't. If we work together—" "You're asking me to help the FBI rescue a federal judge," Rick interrupted, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm asking you to help me save the life of someone my brother loved." Maria watched Rick's face, seeing the internal struggle. Helping Chen would mean exposing his entire network, risking his organization's security, and potentially walking into a trap. But refusing meant accepting that an innocent woman would die. "Send me everything you have on Morrison's people," Rick said finally. "Rick," Marcus protested, "this could be—" "I know what it could be." Rick's voice carried absolute authority. "But we're not the kind of people who let innocent women die for our convenience." After Chen ended the call, the room was quiet. Rick's lieutenants looked uncertain. Their world operated on different principles than the ones Rick was suddenly embracing. "Boss," one of them said carefully, "if we do this, we expose ourselves completely. Chen will know everything about our operations. Then we'd better make sure our operations are clean enough to withstand scrutiny," Rick replied. Maria realized what Rick was doing, using this crisis as an opportunity to transform his organization into something legitimate, something he could be proud of. It was dangerous, revolutionary, and exactly the kind of impossible leap of faith he'd been making since the night they met. "Marcus, activate every asset we have from Vegas to Miami. I want Morrison's entire network mapped within 6 hours." Rick's strategic mind was fully engaged now. "Contact our sources in law enforcement, both clean and dirty. Someone knows where they're holding Judge Valdez." "And if this is a trap," Marcus asked, "then we spring it on our terms." Rick looked around the room at men who'd followed him through wars and betrayals and impossible odds. "Gentlemen, we've built our reputation on loyalty, honor, and protecting our people. Today we find out if those principles apply when the stakes are someone else's life." One by one, his lieutenants nodded. Whatever doubts they had about Rick's new direction, their loyalty to him was absolute. Maria felt a surge of pride and love so intense it nearly brought tears to her eyes. Rick wasn't just choosing to do the right thing. He was using his power and influence to save a woman he'd never met, because it was what honor demanded. "What can I do?" she asked. Rick looked at her, this brave, beautiful woman who'd changed everything about how he saw himself and his world. "Help me figure out how to save Judge Valdez without getting everyone we care about killed." Maria smiled. "I thought you'd never ask." As Rick's organization mobilized for the most important mission of their existence, neither he nor Maria noticed the surveillance drone hovering outside the building's 42nd floor, transmitting their conversation to a black van parked 3 blocks away. Morrison might be in custody, but his deadliest ally was still very much at large. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Tony Ricci, a low-level enforcer for the Torino family who'd been arrested on unrelated charges and was looking to trade information for leniency. Judge Valdez is being held in an abandoned mining complex near Boulder City, Tony told Rick during a clandestine meeting at the Clark County Detention Center. But boss, there's something else you need to know. What? Morrison's not running this operation. He's a front for someone bigger. Rick felt his blood turn to ice. Who? Vincent Torino himself. He's been playing a long game, working with corrupt federal agents to eliminate rival families while positioning himself to take over the entire Southwest. Maria, listening from across the table, understood the implications immediately. If Vincent Torino has been orchestrating everything, then my father's death, the war 5 years ago, Morrison's corruption, even this kidnapping, it's all been part of a 20-year plan to destroy my organization. Rick's voice was deadly quiet. Tony nodded nervously. Word is Torino's got backing from some heavy players in Washington, people who benefit from keeping organized crime chaotic instead of organized. Rick stood abruptly. How many men are guarding Judge Valdez? Maybe a dozen. But boss, it's a trap. They're expecting you to come for her. Of course it's a trap, Rick said grimly. The question is whether we can turn it back on them. 30 minutes later, Rick was coordinating with Director Chen via encrypted video conference. The mining complex was a labyrinth of tunnels and abandoned buildings, perfectly situated to make a rescue attempt nearly impossible. My tactical team can be there in 2 hours, Chen said. And Judge Valdez will be dead in 1, Rick replied. They're monitoring federal communications. The moment your people move, they'll execute her. Then what do you suggest? I go in alone. Draw their attention while your team positions for backup. Absolutely not, Maria interjected. It's suicide. It's the only way to save her life. Chen leaned forward on the video screen. Mr. Castellano, if this is some elaborate scheme... Director, my organization has survived 20 years by being smarter than our enemies, not more reckless. If I wanted Judge Valdez dead, I wouldn't need to arrange an elaborate kidnapping. The truth of his statement was undeniable. Rick had the resources to eliminate federal judges without implicating himself if that had been his goal. There's another option, Maria said suddenly. What if they think they've already won? Both Rick and Chen looked at her questioningly. Vincent Torino wants Rick dead, right? What if we give him what he wants? Or at least make him think he's getting it? Rick understood immediately. Stage my death. Let Torino think he's succeeded while we actually rescue Judge Valdez. It could work, Chen agreed slowly, but it would require perfect timing and absolute trust between our organizations. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. A Mafia boss and an FBI director, planning a joint operation based on mutual trust and shared objectives. Marcus, Rick called to his lieutenant, how quickly can we set up a convincing assassination scene? Give me 3 hours and access to some FBI crime scene equipment. Done, Chen said without hesitation. As they planned the operation, Maria watched Rick transform from a man in love to a strategic commander orchestrating what could be the most important mission of his career. But she also saw something else in his eyes, a weariness that came from 20 years of violence and deception. Rick, she said during a quiet moment, after this is over, what happens to us? I don't know, he admitted. If we pull this off, I'll be legitimately dead to my enemies and legitimately exposed to federal law enforcement. Either way, the Rick Castellano who built this empire won't exist anymore. And who will you be instead? Rick looked at her with love and uncertainty. Hopefully, someone worthy of you. 3 hours later, as the sun set over the Nevada desert, Rick lay motionless in a staged crime scene, while federal and organized crime agents prepared for a rescue operation that would either save an innocent woman's life or destroy them all. In his earpiece, he could hear Maria's voice. I love you, Rick Castellano. Come back to me. For the first time in 20 years, Rick had something more important than survival to fight for. He had a reason to live. The mining complex loomed ahead in the darkness, and Rick knew that whatever happened in the next few hours would determine not just Judge Valdez's fate, but the future of everyone he cared about, including the red-headed angel who'd changed his entire world with a single act of courage. The abandoned Apex mining complex sat like a scar on the desert landscape, its rusted equipment and collapsed buildings creating perfect cover for both kidnappers and rescuers. Rick approached from the north, his death having been convincingly broadcast on every criminal communication channel for the past hour. In his earpiece, he could hear Director Chen coordinating her tactical teams. Overwatch in position. Entry teams holding at rally points. Remember, we wait for Mr. Castellano's signal before moving. The strangest part of the mission was the trust. Federal agents taking orders coordinated by a Mafia boss, organized crime soldiers working alongside FBI tactical teams, all united by the goal of saving an innocent woman's life. Movement in the main building, Marcus reported from his surveillance position. 12 hostiles confirmed. Judge Valdez is being held in the central processing facility. Rick made his way through the complex's outer perimeter, using skills learned in 20 years of survival in hostile territory. The kidnappers were confident, believing their primary target was already dead, and their federal pursuers were too far away to matter. They were wrong on both counts. Target building in sight, Rick whispered into his comm. Beginning approach. Through his scope, he could see Judge Valdez, a small, dignified woman in her 60s, sitting calmly despite being bound to a chair in what had once been the mine's administrative office. Her composure reminded Rick of Maria, brave in the face of overwhelming danger. Vincent Torino is on site, Marcus updated. He's in the building with the judge. Rick felt a surge of savage satisfaction. After 20 years, he would finally face the man who'd orchestrated his father's death, corrupted federal law enforcement, and turned Rick's entire life into a war zone. The entrance to the processing facility was guarded by 2 men with automatic weapons. Rick dispatched them silently, efficiently, and without regret. These weren't soldiers or legitimate businessmen. They were kidnappers threatening an innocent woman's life. Inside the building, Rick could hear voices. Confirmed dead. Castellano's people are scattered and leaderless. The FBI raids tomorrow will clean up what's left. And Judge Valdez? She's seen too much. After the feds find her body, everyone will assume Castellano's people killed her before they scattered. Rick moved through the facility like a ghost, using shadows and ambient noise to mask his approach. 20 years of survival had taught him that patience and precision were more valuable than speed and force. Federal tactical teams, Chen's voice in his earpiece, begin approach. Suspect elimination in 30 seconds. The final room contained Vincent Torino, a man in his 70s with silver hair and dead eyes, standing over Judge Valdez with a pistol in his hand. 4 bodyguards were positioned around the room, their attention focused on the windows and doors. They never saw Rick coming. The first shot took out the lights. In the darkness that followed, Rick moved like death itself. 4 precise shots, 4 eliminated threats. Absolute silence except for Torino's panicked breathing. "Vincent Torino," Rick said, stepping into the dim moonlight filtering through broken windows. "We finally meet." Torino spun toward Rick's voice, his pistol trembling in aged hands. "You're dead. We killed you. You killed a body double. I've been planning this conversation for 20 years. Judge Valdez watched the confrontation with the calm of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms dealing with dangerous criminals. Even bound and threatened, she radiated the authority of someone who wouldn't be intimidated. "Your Honor," Rick said without taking his eyes off Torino, "I'm Rick Castellano. I'm here with the FBI to get you out safely." "Mr. Castellano," she replied calmly, "I appreciate the rescue, but I believe you have some business to finish first." Torino's face contorted with rage and fear. "You destroyed everything I built. 20 years of planning. 20 years of murdering innocent people," Rick corrected. "My father, Agent Chen, Judge Valdez would have been next. How many people have you killed for your ambition? Your father was weak. Agent Chen was expendable, and you're just a street thug who got lucky." Rick felt the familiar cold rage building in his chest, the same fury that had sustained him through 2 decades of violence. But then he heard Maria's voice in his memory. Everyone deserves a chance to be seen for who they really are, not just what they do. Instead of killing Vincent Torino, Rick made a different choice. "You're under arrest," he said, training his weapon on the old man. "Director Chen, your suspect is secured." The FBI tactical teams flooded the building, professionally securing the scene and taking Torino into custody. As they freed Judge Valdez, she approached Rick with surprising steadiness. "Mr. Castellano," she said, "Agent Chen briefed me on your cooperation in this matter. I understand you've made some questionable choices in your life." "Yes, ma'am. I also understand that you chose to risk everything to save the life of someone you'd never met." Judge Valdez studied his face carefully. "That suggests character that goes beyond your reputation." Rick nodded, unsure how to respond. In his world, judges were enemies to be avoided or neutralized. He'd never had one speak to him as if he were a human being capable of redemption. "Your Honor," Rick said carefully, "what happens now?" "Now," Judge Valdez smiled, "we see if a man can change his life as dramatically as he's changed his heart." As federal agents led Torino away in handcuffs, Rick felt something he'd never experienced before, the possibility that his future might be defined by choice rather than circumstance. But the hardest test was still ahead, figuring out how to build a legitimate life with the woman he loved while his entire criminal empire crumbled around them. 6 months later, Rick stood on the terrace of his new home in Scottsdale, watching the Arizona sunrise paint the desert mountains in shades of gold and copper. The house was smaller than his Vegas penthouse, quieter than his warehouse headquarters, and more beautiful than anything he'd ever owned, because it was the first place that felt like home. "Coffee's ready," Maria called from the kitchen, and Rick smiled at the simple domestic pleasure of sharing morning routines with the woman he loved. The transition hadn't been easy. Dissolving a multi-million-dollar criminal organization while cooperating with federal investigations required delicate negotiations and careful restructuring. But Judge Valdez had been true to her word. Rick's cooperation in the Torino case, combined with his organization's assistance in rooting out corruption, had earned him immunity from prosecution in exchange for full disclosure and legitimate business practices. "Any regrets?" Maria asked as she joined him on the terrace, handing him a steaming mug. "About leaving that life?" "None." Rick wrapped his arm around her waist. "About the people I hurt getting there? Every day." It was honest, more honest than Rick had been with anyone in 20 years. Therapy, a condition of his immunity agreement, was teaching him that acknowledging damage didn't diminish his worth as a person. "Marcus called," Maria said. "The security consulting business landed another contract. Apparently, legitimate companies are very interested in hiring former organized crime experts to protect them from current organized crime threats." Rick chuckled. "Who would have thought my criminal expertise would be more valuable legally than illegally?" Several of his former lieutenants had made similar transitions. Marcus ran corporate security. Tony specialized in financial fraud prevention, and others found legitimate outlets for skills developed in illegitimate circumstances. Not all of Rick's people had chosen legal paths, but enough had to prove that redemption was possible with the right motivation. "There's something else," Maria said. Maria, her tone shifting to carefully neutral. Rick looked at her sharply. After 6 months together, he knew when she was managing his reactions to potentially difficult news. Director Chen called. "Vincent Torino died in federal custody last night. Heart attack." Rick absorbed this information without surprise. Torino was 73 years old, facing multiple life sentences, and had been in declining health. The old man's death wasn't unexpected, but it represented the end of a chapter that had defined Rick's entire adult life. "How do you feel?" Maria asked. "Empty," Rick said after a moment. "For 20 years, everything I did was in response to what he'd taken from me. Now that he's gone, I have to figure out who I am when I'm not fighting his war. You're the man who chose truth over revenge, the man who saved Judge Valdez's life, the man who transformed an entire criminal organization into legitimate businesses." Maria stood on her tiptoes to kiss his cheek. "You're the man I'm going to marry." Rick turned to stare at her. "Maria, I'm not asking, Rick, I'm informing." Her green eyes sparkled with love and determination. "We've been through federal investigations, criminal trials, and organizational transformations. A wedding is going to be the easy part." Rick felt laughter bubble up from somewhere deep in his chest. Genuine, unguarded joy that had been missing from his life for decades. "Is that a proposal, Maria Santos?" "It's a statement of fact, Rick Castellano. The only question is whether you want a big wedding or a small one. As long as you're the bride, I don't care if we get married in a gas station bathroom." Maria grinned. "I was thinking something slightly more romantic, but I appreciate the flexibility." Rick kissed her then, soft and deep and full of promises about the future they were building together. In the distance, the desert stretched endlessly under a clear blue sky, vast and beautiful and full of possibilities. His phone buzzed with a text from Director Chen. "Torino's death closes the last case file. Congratulations on your new life, Mr. Castellano. Use it well." Rick showed the message to Maria, who smiled and deleted it. "No more looking backward," she said firmly. "Only forward." "Forward to what?" "Forward to whatever we want to build together. Legitimate business, family, maybe some kids who'll grow up knowing their father as a hero instead of a criminal." Rick had never considered the possibility of children, of passing on something positive instead of just protecting what he'd taken. The idea both terrified and thrilled him. "Maria," he said seriously, "are you sure you want to tie your life to mine? Even legitimately, my past will always be part of who I am." "Rick, your past brought us together. It taught you loyalty, courage, and how to protect the people you love. Those aren't things to be ashamed of. They're the foundation we'll build our future on." As they watched the sun climb higher into the desert sky, Rick realized that Maria was right. His past wasn't a burden to escape. It was the experience that had prepared him to appreciate the gift of a normal life with an extraordinary woman. "I love you, Maria Santos," he said, pulling her close. "I love you too, Rick Castellano, now and always." In the distance, a red-tailed hawk soared over the desert mountains, riding the thermal currents toward whatever horizon called to it. Rick watched the bird's effortless flight and understood that sometimes the most courageous thing a person could do was trust the wind to carry them toward something better than what they'd left behind. He was no longer a mafia boss or a criminal, or a man defined by violence and revenge. He was simply Rick, a man who'd found redemption in the love of a brave woman and the possibility of a future worth living. And for the first time in his adult life, that was enough.